Have you ever felt this quiet little secret that almost no one admits out loud? Your phone lights up with a message. Dinner plans are cancelled. A meeting suddenly disappears from your calendar. The weekend that looked crowded and exhausting a moment ago opens up into empty space. And instead of disappointment, something unexpected happens. A warm, almost guilty wave of relief moves through you. Suddenly the whole evening belongs to you. No conversations to manage, no expectations to meet, no subtle performances to maintain, just silence, just space, just the quiet comfort of being alone in your own home. For many people, that moment feels like an unexpected gift. But the second you say it out loud, the reactions arrive almost instantly. You spend too much time alone. You should get out more. Isn't that a little antisocial? And in that moment, a deeper tension quietly appears. A small doubt begins to form. Maybe they see something you don't. Maybe this comfort with solitude is slowly turning into isolation. Maybe one day the world simply stops knocking, and you're left wondering whether you went too far. But what if that entire assumption is wrong? What if the desire to be alone is not a flaw at all, but a signal of something far more intelligent, far more self-aware, and far more powerful than most people ever realize? Because behind that quiet relief when plans disappear lies an entire psychological pattern that very few people ever stop to examine. Once you begin to notice it, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Some people feel energized by noise, crowds, and constant interaction. Others leave those same situations feeling strangely exhausted. Some people feel most alive when the room is full of voices. Others feel most alive at the exact moment the world finally goes quiet. Why is that difference so powerful? Why do some minds thrive in constant connection while others need distance just to think clearly again? And why have so many of the most thoughtful, self-aware, and original people in history spent enormous stretches of their lives completely alone? To understand this, we need to look honestly at two very different kinds of people who both love solitude, but for completely different reasons. The first kind are the ones who are recovering. Imagine coming home late after a long day. The door closes softly behind you, your shoes come off, the lights stay low. For a moment, you simply stand there in the quiet. Then something subtle begins to change. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows. The tension you carried for hours begins to dissolve. You may have been surrounded by people all day. Meetings, conversations, small talk, careful words, polite smiles. Nothing dramatic happened. But every one of those moments quietly asked something from you. Listening closely, responding thoughtfully, managing your reactions, choosing every word with care. And little by little, without even noticing it, your emotional energy was being spent. Most of us underestimate how exhausting that invisible effort really is, especially when life has already been difficult lately. A painful breakup, a betrayal that cut deeper than expected, weeks of relentless stress. Suddenly the world starts feeling less like a community and more like a silent battlefield, not with explosions, but with unspoken expectations, tiny misunderstandings, and emotional bruises that never appear on the outside. After enough time in that quiet war, solitude stops being just a preference. It becomes shelter. Your home turns into a small fortress where there are no judgments, no sudden demands, no watchful eyes evaluating every move you make. Inside those walls, you can finally breathe. You can think without filtering every sentence. You can feel whatever you're feeling without disguising it or explaining it to anyone. Around other people, even close friends, We all perform a subtle kind of emotional editing. We soften certain words, we moderate certain reactions, we hide the sharper edges of what we truly feel. But when you're alone, that editing finally stops. You can sit with sadness, with anger, with confusion, and instead of suppressing those emotions, your mind begins to process them honestly. This isn't weakness, this is psychological repair. Just as the body needs rest to heal a physical injury, the mind sometimes needs silence to heal the invisible ones. For certain people, those quiet hours become the most powerful form of self-care they possess. But pause for a moment. What if that repair never ends? What if the shelter becomes so comfortable that stepping back into the world begins to feel impossible? That is the hidden tension every solitary soul eventually faces. Now consider the second kind of person who craves solitude. For years, I thought there was something wrong with me. Until one evening after a 3-hour networking event. I arrived home, kicked off my shoes, and felt my brain power down like a phone hitting 1% battery. The constant mental juggling of reading the room, crafting responses, and staying socially on had completely drained me. In those first minutes of silence, everything suddenly made sense. This wasn't a flaw, it was simply how I was wired. Psychologists have studied this for decades, and the evidence is remarkably clear. Not every human personality runs on the same kind of social energy. Some people genuinely gain energy from being around others. Conversation energizes them. Crowds excite them. Activity fuels them. But for introverted people, and according to research discussed by Susan Cain in Quiet, the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking, between 30 and 50% of the population may fall into this category. The exact same environments slowly drain their mental battery. Even when the evening is enjoyable. Even when the people are friends they truly like. Have you ever left a gathering you genuinely enjoyed, yet still felt strangely depleted afterward? Every conversation demands attention. Every exchange requires subtle mental processing, reading tone, observing expressions, interpreting dozens of small emotional signals that most people barely notice. The introverted brain often processes this social information in much greater depth. That depth can create remarkable insight and empathy, but it comes with a cost: mental fatigue. After several hours, many introverts feel an exhaustion that is difficult to explain to someone who doesn't experience it. Not anger, not boredom, just a deep, quiet depletion. And the only reliable way to recharge that battery is through genuine solitude. Silence becomes the charger. Time alone becomes the reset button. Yet here is something modern society still struggles to understand. Our culture celebrates constant connection, endless networking, group chats, open offices, weekends packed with plans. But beneath that pressure, millions of people are secretly counting the minutes until they can close their front door and remove the invisible social mask they've been wearing since morning. Because every one of us performs slightly different versions of ourselves depending on who we're with. The professional self, the friendly self, the family self. None of these identities are fake, but maintaining them requires energy. And that raises a quiet question few people stop to ask. Who are you when the performance finally ends? When you step inside your home and the outside world fades away, something subtle but powerful happens. The performance stops. Your real voice returns. Your mind no longer calculates how every sentence might be interpreted. For the first time all day, you can simply exist without explaining yourself. You can think strange thoughts without defending them. Sing badly without embarrassment. Sit in silence for 10 minutes. or stare at the ceiling without anyone asking if something is wrong. That freedom might sound small, but psychologically, it is profoundly restorative. Because when we spend too much time performing roles, we slowly lose contact with the quieter voice beneath them. The voice that asks deeper questions, notices hidden patterns, and wonders whether the direction of our life actually makes sense. Solitude gives that voice room to speak again. And for certain minds, that private conversation with themselves becomes the most important part of the entire day. Especially for people whose work depends on imagination. Writers, artists, inventors, programmers, deep thinkers. Imagine the mind as a still lake. When the surface is perfectly calm, you can see straight to the bottom. Ideas that normally remain hidden slowly rise upward. Unexpected connections form between thoughts that once seemed unrelated. Entire new possibilities begin to take shape. But the moment notifications arrive, conversations interrupt you, or expectations ripple the surface. Those fragile insights scatter before they fully appear. And here lies a remarkable paradox. Why does the silence we're taught to fear often unlock the most revolutionary ideas? Because in that calm, the mind does not merely rest, it reveals. Consider Isaac Newton during the plague years of 1665 and 1666. Retreating to the countryside, months of solitude allowed him to develop calculus and the foundations of gravitational theory. Or Virginia Woolf, who insisted on the necessity of a private room where uninterrupted thought could give birth to novels like Mrs. Dalloway. Even Nikola Tesla frequently withdrew into long periods of isolation, claiming that his greatest ideas arrived only in complete silence. That is why deep creative work almost always requires uninterrupted solitude, sometimes hours, sometimes days. In that quiet space, the mind enters what psychologists call a state of flow. Time bends. Minutes stretch into hours. The outside world fades away. And inside that focus, things that once seemed impossible suddenly become clear. Solutions appear where confusion once lived. Entire worlds begin forming inside the mind. But reaching that state requires exactly what modern life almost never gives us anymore. Long, unbroken silence. And this leads to something even deeper. When you stay alone long enough, the silence itself begins to change. At first it feels like simple absence. No voices, no movement, no demands, just space. But after a while that emptiness transforms. It starts to feel alive. Thoughts become sharper. Memories surface with unexpected clarity. Questions you never had room for in the noise finally begin to appear. Why did that small conversation yesterday feel slightly off? Why is that old memory from years ago suddenly returning now? What ambition keeps knocking quietly at the door of your mind, no matter how many times you ignore it? Solitude has a strange ability to slow the mind just enough for the hidden patterns of your life to become visible. But there is another layer to this clarity. Sometimes, silence reveals truths about ourselves we would rather avoid. The fears we hide in distraction. The contradictions we quietly overlook. The questions we postpone because we are afraid of the answers. The quiet can feel confronting, as if the silence itself is holding up a mirror you cannot easily turn away from. During the rush of ordinary days, most of us operate on pure instinct. We react quickly. We move from one task to the next. We answer messages, attend meetings, follow routines. But when the mind finally receives uninterrupted time, something different begins to happen. It starts observing, not just the world outside, but the person moving through it. And that ability to observe yourself may be one of the rarest and most valuable skills a human being can develop. most people spend their entire lives reacting. Very few pause long enough to understand why they react the way they do. But in solitude, that begins to change. You replay a small moment from earlier in the day, perhaps a minor disagreement at work, and suddenly you notice details that were invisible in real time. The defensive tone in your own voice. The moment pride quietly took control. The exact second you stopped truly listening. These realizations almost never appear in the middle of the conversation. They need distance. They need quiet. And above all, they require complete honesty with yourself. Because after enough time alone, something subtle begins to happen. You slowly lose the ability to lie to yourself. Contradictions become harder to ignore. The convenient stories you tell about who you are start to feel less convincing. And from that uncomfortable clarity, something powerful is born. Genuine self-awareness. Here's the paradox that surprises many people. Why can silence reveal more than hours of conversation? Because without the constant presence of other voices, your own truth finally has space to echo clearly. And that self-awareness quietly transforms the way you move through the world. You speak less impulsively, you react with more composure. Your words begin to carry a different weight because they come from reflection instead of reflex. People begin to listen when you speak, even if you are not the loudest person in the room. They sense something different. Clarity, emotional discipline, a quiet kind of confidence. And here lies one of the most beautiful paradoxes of solitude. The people who are most comfortable being alone often become the ones who connect most deeply with others. Because they do not enter conversations searching desperately for approval. They arrive curious, present, completely unafraid of silence. They listen more carefully, they leave space for real thoughts to unfold. And other people feel that difference almost immediately. Of course, none of this means solitude is always perfect or completely safe. There is a delicate line between healthy solitude and something darker. Imagine the quiet risk unfolding slowly. The fortress that once protected you begins to close in. The silence that once restored you becomes isolation. The fear of being misunderstood grows stronger. And stepping back into the world begins to feel strangely difficult. When reflection turns into endless rumination. When silence becomes avoidance instead of renewal. When the shelter that once protected you quietly becomes a prison. That is when solitude stops serving you. The difference lies in intention. Healthy solitude is never permanent withdrawal. It is preparation. You sharpen the blade in the quiet so you can return to the world sharper, clearer, and stronger. You choose your relationships more carefully. You speak with greater precision. You live with deeper awareness. So the next time a plan gets cancelled and that secret rush of relief washes over you, don't feel guilty. Don't question yourself. Celebrate it. You are not antisocial. There is nothing wrong with you. You may simply understand something that many people spend their entire lives running from. Solitude is not the absence of life. It is the space where life becomes visible. It is the moment when thoughts finally slow down enough for meaning to emerge. It is the quiet room where the noise of everyone else's expectations fades, and your own inner voice can finally speak clearly. If you've been carrying even a little shame about loving your time alone, I hope this video helps release it. Tell me in the comments, are you part of Team Silence? Did this video finally give you permission to enjoy your quiet evenings without guilt? And if you know someone who keeps apologizing for needing solitude, send this video to them. It might be the kindest thing you do for them this year. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you made it this far, You're part of the small percentage of people who truly want to change their lives. Leave a like, subscribe, and share this video so that, just like you, more people can develop a sovereign mindset. Don't miss the next video. It could be your first step toward becoming truly sovereign.